Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Still working my way through 188 pages on that police corruption file, but a lot of people have asked me to comment on the latest British Columbia COVID orders, so I'll have a look at that. This one is fairly short. Let's dive in here. So it starts out with a preamble. I'm not going to go through the preamble. It basically says COVID is really serious, so here's why we're doing this. It also talks about, why they think travel restrictions. It talks about some travel is essential. None of this has any real legal effect, although it can sometimes be used for if a judge needs to interpret some clause that's not entirely clear. So the preamble, we're not going to worry about too much. There are some portions of the definition that are worth looking at here. Essential goods and supplies means any goods and supplies that are necessary for the health, safety, and welfare of people, including, without limitation, the following: food, water, and other beverages, fuel and gasoline, healthcare goods, pharmaceutical and medical supplies, personal hygiene, sanitation, and cleaning goods. Note the without limitation. So this is potentially a broader category than that. It's not clear what the limits are. There are some places where I can think of things that might be kind of debatable. Certainly, medical supplies are covered. Is alcohol covered? It's under a beverage, but it's not sort of what we typically think of as a beverage. But if you're talking about an alcoholic, it might in fact be medically necessary. So maybe that's covered. And if alcohol is covered, what about other substances? All of this gets into, some interpretation things, but certainly the things that are enumerated there would count. And essential purpose means any of the purposes described in Section 3. We'll get to that. They describe the various health authority regions. I'm not going to go through all of those in detail, but those are described elsewhere. School is pretty much any kind of school that you would think as a school. It's a fairly simple definition. So let's look at what this actually does. Prohibition on travel into or out of health authority region. Person must not travel into or out of any of the following except for an essential purpose. So A, the Fraser Valley Coastal Health Authority region, B, the Northern Interior Health Authority region, C, the Vancouver Island Health Authority region. And this does not apply to travel into or out of the province. Now, for the purposes of Section 2, the following are essential purposes. So you can travel out for essential purposes, so here's what they list. Moving to a different principal residence or assisting a person to move for that purpose, carrying out a work-related purpose, including volunteer work, so it doesn't have to be paid, commercially transporting goods, receiving healthcare services or social services, or assisting someone to receive these services, attending court. That's an important one because sometimes people have court cases that aren't where they live, complying with a court order, exercising parental responsibilities, including spending parenting time with a minor child, accessing child care, attending classes or receiving training through a post-secondary institution or school, responding to emergencies or critical incidents, including incidents that involve search and rescue operations. Also important, especially because sometimes those require volunteers. Providing care and assistance to a person who requires care or assistance because of psychological, behavioral, or health condition, or physical, cognitive, or mental impairment. Also covers visiting by an essential visitor as provided for in by the Ministry of Health. This is with relation to seniors. Attending a funeral service, traveling under the authority of a variance of an order issued by the provincial health officer, if the variance was made before this order comes into force. Traveling by residents of the local health area of Bella Coola Valley or Central Coast to Port Hardy to obtain essential goods and supplies. Traveling by residents of the local health area of Hope to Chilliwack to obtain essential goods and supplies. Traveling by residents of the Northern Health Authority region into the Nisga'a Health Authority region. Traveling by residents of the Nisga'a Health Authority region into the Northern Interior Health Authority region. And returning to a person's own principal residence. So that's a lot of different exceptions there, and they all seem like they make sense. There is not any sort of apparent catch-all provision. Often there's, something that says something like any other necessary purpose. That doesn't appear here. So that's something to take note of. I'm not going to comment on whether this is a good idea or not. That's really a question for scientists rather than lawyers. But that's sort of the idea of what they're trying to establish here. Now, this one I like a little better than some of the other ones because it doesn't include some of the surprises that we saw in the other ones, where you have to talk to the police and you have to tell them what you're doing and thereby have to give up certain rights that are normally enjoyed. However, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that there is still a surprise in this, because why? Of course there's a surprise in it. So, prohibition on abusive or belligerent behavior. A person must not engage in abusive or belligerent behavior towards an enforcement officer acting in relation to this order. So, enforcement officer is defined, but abusive or belligerent behavior is not defined. We don't have any clear, details on what that means. Now, normally, it's not a good idea to be abusive or belligerent towards a police officer, but there is a fairly wide range of abusive or belligerent that is not illegal. People sometimes have opinions about police officers, and usually it's not illegal to express those so long as you are not obstructing justice or in some other way committing an offense in and of itself. In fact, normally this conduct is protected by your right to freedom of expression. You can tell people you don't like them with it, so this one seems like a really interesting one and one that potentially engages charter concerns. I have some issues with that. I don't see a reason why that was necessary. Certainly, people should be nice to police officers. There's no reason to be hostile, and it almost never gets you anything. But I do have a problem with making it a law that you have to be. So I don't like this section, but comparatively, it's much less bad than some of the things we've seen snuck into, for instance, the Ontario order. So this one is not as bad. As noted, there's this big long list of exceptions, but there is no provision here that requires speaking to the police, which is a really good thing because that enables you to follow your ordinary charter rights, which would include not talking to the police and not volunteering any information that otherwise might get you into trouble. The general rule, of course, is that talking to police is almost always a bad idea. And I say almost always because there are a few places where you might be compelled to provide a statement. But if you are in a situation where the police are insisting on a statement, you should probably be calling a lawyer to find out what your rights are, what your obligations are, where the limits are, because that is an excellent time to talk to a lawyer. The one sort of caution I will give is that if the police are demanding a breath sample at the roadside, you don't have the right at that point to a lawyer before you provide that roadside sample. This is a way that people often get tripped up and can blunder their way into charges. So I'll just put that there as a note. But again, if you are in trouble, generally it's a good idea to contact a lawyer. I have serious issues with that particular element of impaired law. I think it trips up a lot of otherwise innocent people who are just trying to follow their rights. But that's probably a topic for another video. In terms of this order, I, again, am not a scientist. I'm not going to sort of comment on whether this is a great idea in that sense. However, a couple of things that I just sort of think about here. One, I like that the essential goods and supplies is left open-ended, because there's often going to be things that are essential to somebody that you may not have thought of. One that leaps out to me is something like a water pump. If you are on a rural property and you don't have water service, you're probably getting your water from a well. And so water pump is not listed under essential goods and supplies under the specific, but under the catch-all of the without limitation, it almost certainly would be covered if you need that for the health, safety, and welfare of your family. So, if your pump breaks down, you can't get water, that's a big deal. So that would seem to be covered under essential goods and supplies. I do wonder why they limit when they say, travel to obtain essential goods and supplies. It's by residents of particular areas to other specific particular areas. I wonder if that's enough, because there's lots of rural people out there who have to travel to cities to get stuff. And so I wonder if this is going to leave some people out in the cold. And if it does so, there may be stronger arguments for this infringing their rights in various fashion, especially because these essential goods and supplies are very much essential things. Food, water, healthcare. These are not things that you can just say, hey, I'm just going to do without these. So that's a bit of a thing. Now, there's so many exceptions here that it would be somewhat difficult for the police to prove that you were traveling outside of these for, some other purpose. So again, that's a proof issue for if they want to actually charge somebody. I suspect that the goal is probably not to do a lot of charging here. It looks to me from the construction of this that the goal is more to be a public relations statement and to discourage people, and so more informational. But they certainly can charge on this. The part that really leaps out to me as a why did they include this, and this is almost certainly a violation of rights that can't be saved, is that prohibition on abusive or belligerent behavior. I don't see how that's called for here, and I don't see how that certainly seems to infringe freedom of expression, and I don't see how that can be saved under Section 1. So I think that part, if it were to be challenged, would be very vulnerable. But I can't say for certain, right? Courts sometimes surprise me. I am not infallible. Sometimes I am wrong. Sometimes I'm really sure about something, and it turns out I'm wrong. And I might feel that the court was wrong about it, but the court isn't wrong. That is how the law works, is, you can't argue the law. And so we'll see, right? Don't say, hey, I saw this YouTube lawyer and he says he thinks it's unconstitutional, so I can just ignore that. Because the other thing is that if you want to challenge it, that's many dollars. Sometimes fighting for your rights costs many dollars. So it's best not to be the person who ends up, having to challenge that one, because most of us have things that you would rather do with your wallet than empty it out into the courtroom, essentially. All right, thank you for watching. I hope this has been educational or informative. A lot of people wanted me to sort of give my thoughts on that one. It's not as bad, but I mean, the Ontario one is real bad, so I guess that's all I can really say about that. I want to thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please share it with your friends. Please subscribe to see more content. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters, Sir Daniel Wicks of Alberta, Jason Elliott, Canada's National Firearms Association, North Central Process Service, Kyle Martin, Jean-Guy Toussaint, Ivo Nedev, the CCFR, BCAMF.org, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. All of those at the $50 level. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Marc-Olivier Damour. And at the $20 level, Matt Ward, Mark Whittington, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, and Adam Meester, as well as a number of you at the $10 level who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge, and I'm going to try to get that 188-page monstrosity out as soon as I can. As I said, I'm trying to chop it down into sort of a something manageable, but I may end up having to make it sort of a multi-part video, just so that it's something that you can watch without it taking your entire day. Anyway, thank you once again, and see you next time.